This is how we start every thing.
We shouldn't even
David.
do an intro. We should just have the beginning just be us fighting. It's us bickering. Why even introduce me? I'll just be yelling at you and you can yell back. And it's content.
Our tweener head insider for the WTA, and I can't even say the second part before we recorded too. I can't start that.
He was going to call me.
No.
You all know about it. You all know it. You all know it.
This entire beginning is being cut immediately.
I agreed to be on this interview to confront you about it. And now you all know about it.
This is how David gets me in trouble. This is how we start.
Not the way I want to get you in trouble.
This does that even mean? Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this amazing video. No. Welcome back to David Kane, who is our resident WTA insider. Welcome back, David. It's nice that David has come back from 3.5 weeks in France, and David is now back in the United States, ready to talk about the French Open and amongst other things. And the first thing we have to ask you is, how was your trip? And how is your pronunciation in French? Because David threatened to do this entire thing in French.
I like to throw Phil a little curveball every so often. By every so often, I mean every 2 to 3 minutes.
Every time we do this.
It was a great trip. I had a lot of fun. And now I'm back to make our dear Philip deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And hopefully make you all laugh in the process.
Great. I can't even say great stuff. I just said great in my mind. So I'm just going to say that. But David, how would you describe this year's French Open? The women's draw.
Weird.
Okay.
And
I like that. Why?
It was the kind of situation where it felt like we were gearing up for a final that wasn't going to do the draw justice. Because if we did, in fact, end up with an Iga Swiatek Arina Sabalenka final, I think it would have kind of obscured the fact that there were just a tremendous amount of upsets in the draw. And we got to a point by around the quarterfinals where it felt like, okay, things had stabilized in a way that wouldn't have, I think, done the first week justice. And yet, sure enough, we got the upset in the quarterfinal of Ons Jabeur against Beatriz Haddad-Maia. We got the upset of Arina Sabalenka against Karolina Muchova. And then in the final, we got a surprising situation between Iga Swiatek and Muchova, which nearly went Muchova's way. But I think Iga ended the clay court season declaring herself as the player to beat on clay. And in that sense, there was stability. But I think looking back on the story of the tournament, it was an odd one, all told.
Well, to be honest, I totally agree, because looking at the fourth round of who showed up, from Sorenko to, she was a lucky loser. The one that played Muchova, Avanasian. Help me with this.
Avanasian. Alina Avanasian.
She was a lucky loser?
Yes.
Or she was a lucky loser, and she made it that far. Pavlyuchenkova, another one that made it really far. She made it to the quarters. So did Svitolina. Like, these are just some names that, if you told me a month ago that would be in the quarterfinal of a Grand Slam, I would have said no. But again, and to be honest, I don't think the Haddad-Maia over Jabeur is that far-fetched.
No. I mean, I think the way that it all shook out for Haddad-Maia and against Jabeur was surprising. I mean, I think Jabeur was well and truly in control of that match and really lost the plot and really went off the boil in the third set. Kicked a ball that she thought had gone out, was actually in, gives up a break points. This is sort of goes to show that the sort of no thoughts, just vibes thing that Jabeur brings to her matches, while entertaining and often does work, is not foolproof. And certainly in a match as important as a Grand Slam quarterfinal is not foolproof. And I think compare that to an Iga Swiatek, who has, a complete and total game plan set up from first point. It's why Iga's the one with now 3 Roland Garros titles, and Jabeur is yet to make a final.
I think the craziest thing about that is how much Iga is already solidifying herself as not just the top player to beat for the next couple of years, but to be considered one of the best in the past couple of years. Because I think even though it was rough at the beginning when she took over from Barty as that number one role after Barty retired, Swiatek has now come into her own where she well-deservingly is the number one player in the world and already has 4 slams, 3 slams.
Yes, 4 slams,
Four,
3
4
for
slams.
Roland Garros, 1 US
One.
Open.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. Like, she's already dominating the French where it's not kind of a fluke that we've seen a couple times in the last couple of years. And she won another major outside of the French. So she is proving to be that consistent and one of the best we've seen play.
I mean, she's averaging a great clip. She's winning at least, she's averaging 1 slam a year, winning 2 last year and now 1 this year. And she's still so incredibly young, 22. I mean, at this point, I mean, this is, yes, 22, just turned 22. So, I mean, she's got
2001.
Yeah. And already, I was 10 years old. Yeah. So that was, she's on a very good track to continue to rack up. I mean, I don't think double digit is out of the question if she maintains this pace. This level of dominance on a particular surface is not a slouch on the hard courts. I mean, the fact that she was able to win the US Open in conditions that she did not like last year makes the US Open, Australian Open very much fair game for her to continue to challenge for. She is a junior Wimbledon champion, even if grass is not necessarily her favorite surface. This is someone who is very competitive, is a phenomenal athlete, loves to win, hates to lose, on a level that I think carries her to these big titles. I mean, go back to the final against Mukova, was twice down a break in the third and digs deep, channels that experience, channels that competitive mindset, and just overwhelms Mukova in the end. And that is a mindset that's going to win a lot more slams than just the 4 she's already won.
Well, we were really close to having a different Czech win the Grand Slam title from Paris. Like, let's be real here, because I think at one point I thought Muchova had it when it was 4-all. She was down 30-40, right, at 4-all. And then she comes back to win.
I know for sure she was up a break twice.
Exactly. So, and from Krejcikova to Vondrousova to so many others that have kind of been in this position from the Czech Republic, it could have been another one-off for a Grand Slam champion at the French.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, Mukova is really just a phenomenal talent. It's just a pure tennis talent that I think a lot of people gravitate towards. A lot of tennis purists really gravitate towards her and her game and are really happy that she is healthy and competing now consistently, it seems, for these big titles. I was not really all that convinced that she was going to take it home. I mean, she played probably one of the best matches of her life against Aryna Sabalenka in the semifinals, and typically that doesn't happen twice. And up against, a juggernaut in Swiatek, who had not been physically tested really through 6 matches, was always going to be that much fresher in the final, and obviously has so much more experience. So as tough as things got for Swiatek in the third, I for one didn't have a ton of doubt that she was going to figure that out. And it's one of those litmus tests matches for Swiatek, where if she hadn't, then I think it really would have changed the color of her season, where now she's basically at par. She did what she needed to do. She, dominated as much as she could for the clay court swing. And now the rest is essentially gravy, because she'll have some weeks to decompress and prepare for the hard courts, where she'll be as much of a favorite, maybe not the same level of favorite that she was at last year's US Open, but certainly a big one. And it'll all depend on how her big hitting rivals, your Sabalenkas and your Rybakinas, will show up. But she's here to play. And I think that's what's been really impressive over these last few months, that for some of the ups and downs that Rybakina and Sabalenka have experienced, Swiatek has been one of the more consistent players in the last 6 weeks.
And speaking of Sabalenka too, can we talk about how would you say it was a mental collapse or just complete during the semifinal? 5-2, like that to me, and when we go back and look at it, looking at that scoreline before everything imploded, what would you contribute to that? I wouldn't say devastating loss, but complete mental lapse of execution.
So I'm not typically somebody who is all that sympathetic when somebody loses 5 games in a row. I don't think it's helpful or honest in most cases to say anything other than they choked. When you're up 5-2, when you're number 2 in the world in a Grand Slam semifinal with the experience, undefeated at slams this year. And yet, for much of the match, save for perhaps the 3-2 to 5-2 game, Muchova was playing the better match. She was just she had Sabalenka out of position, deeply uncomfortable for the majority of that match. The fact that Sabalenka was even able to push it to a third, I think, is just a testament to how consistent and how refused to lose Sabalenka has been at slams thus far this year. And so, a little bit of good luck went, Muchova's way. She gets the big serve on match point. She gets the big return, when Sabalenka starts serving for the match at 5-3. Sabalenka's a little rattled. Muchova just kind of picks up her game again and rolls to the finish line. And Sabalenka was having some issues with her strings, was running to her team to get a racket switched. And so I think a lot was going on. And it was also a very emotional week for Sabalenka, who was really under a lot of scrutiny and criticism for her perceived lack of condemnation of the continuing invasion in Ukraine, was put to, I would argue, burgeoning on unfair, I don't want to say attack, burgeoning on unfair interrogation from a Ukrainian journalist who was in her first press conference, was in her second press conference, and asked increasingly incendiary questions. I am loath to even call the second press conference questions. It was more just a series of accusations.
Back and forth. Okay.
And it was, I don't think the transcript really does the back and forth justice. It was very uncomfortable. It's the loudest and most passionate a journalist has ever been in my presence at a press conference. It was much, it was loud, as loud as, she's got the microphone and she's, yelling these things at her, and Sabalenka was very uncomfortable. And so I think a lot of what happened subsequent to that was Sabalenka wanting to avoid that particular journalist. And what's ironic is that when she returns to press after the Svitolina match, she answered, I would argue, tougher questions than what that journalist was asking. Point blank, why were you photographed with President Lukashenko? Do you condemn the war? Do you support Lukashenko? These were, I think, tougher questions even than what she was being asked in her first 2 matches. And Sabalenka answered all of them. And preview to the second slate of Breakpoint episodes that are going to drop tomorrow. So by the time this airs, it will already be up. It's sort of unfortunate because they finally address the situation in Ukraine. As we discussed a few months ago, it had yet to be discussed. They save it for the very last episode. And Sabalenka's coach, Anton Dubrov, really outlines the gray area that Russian and Belarusian athletes find themselves in, where they feel guilty that this is happening on account of their country, and yet the pressure they feel to not say the wrong thing is incredibly great because they know that the consequences are potentially very high. And Sabalenka, in spite of that, walked the line, in Paris. And I think, we can argue for Kasatkina, perhaps Rublev, even Medvedev. I think Sabalenka's gone the farthest in terms of any of the other players of being as explicit as she possibly can. Okay. I mean, the transcript's available. I think the video's available as well. But
the press conference was powerful.
Yeah. I mean, given that, it was unfortunate that she wasn't able to then take it at least to the final, if not really, it just felt like the momentum was really with her. She had let out a lot of this emotion. And then unfortunately, it gets really unfortunately outplayed by Karolina Muchova. Just played a phenomenal match. And perhaps you could attribute some of that five game collapse to just maybe the emotional exhale of what it all kind of comes. It felt like Arena was really white knuckling a lot of the tournament to that point. The Sloane Stephens match was very uncomfortable. Parts of the Svitolina match was uncomfortable. So all of which to say, Muchova played a phenomenal match. There was a lot of emotion on Sabalenka's shoulders. So it's a more complicated choke than I think I am even used to witnessing. So it's one that's worth really examining and not just saying, Sabalenka choked, she lost the last 5 games of the semifinal. And hopefully she's relaxed and decompressed and able to come back at Wimbledon and play her best there.
Well, I think before we get into Wimbledon I feel like the storyline is misconstrued too from everything that happened in France. From the Svitolina not shaking Sabalenka's hand, which we all knew was going to happen, but Sabalenka supposedly not being aware of the situation. You could probably answer that better than I can when she answered that question. And 2, I think it's going to be worse at Wimbledon because of what happened last year with no one being able to play and being in a position where she actually could be the favorite to win the tournament.
What do I think the reaction will be? I mean, it'll be an interesting contrast, because I think it was pretty evident that the Roland Garros crowd was not plugged in to the politics and sort of the inner workings of everything that was going on. It was all pretty much news to them. The fact that, Sabalenka did not attempt to shake Marta Kostyuk's hand in the first round was booed. The fact that Svitolina did not appear to attempt to shake Sabalenka's hand in the quarterfinals, then she was booed. I will be honest, when I first watched it happen, I thought, oh God, did she do that on purpose? Because it just seemed awkward. And you obviously knew that ostensibly you obviously know that this handshake is not going to happen. And then she smiles at the team, and the way it was portrayed. I mean, I am given her all of the answers that she had in the press conference, I would be more inclined to say that it was just sort of Sabalenka being a little spacey at the net. And I think that's also something to consider, is that these are, young men and women in their early to mid 20s who are not nearly as worldly as one would assume for players who literally travel the world. I mean, for them, the world is, and they say this all the time, is the court and the hotel, maybe a restaurant. These are not players who have CNN and, MSNBC or even any kind of news show playing around the clock. They're watching tennis, or they're watching Grey's Anatomy, which is a wild thing to hear. These players from Europe are just so obsessed with Grey's Anatomy. And I guess because it's like a million seasons that you can just kind of watch it ad infinitum, but they're not plugged in to the world
because they don't need to be, or they're not worried about it because it doesn't affect their day-to-day.
It doesn't affect them. Yeah. And then there is the idea of the tennis player being in the bubble, being focused only on themselves. And then that kind of makes you then ill-equipped to discuss these sorts of global issues. And so do I think there will be a harsh reception for Russians and Belarusians at Wimbledon? I mean, I think we can look to the Australian Open, where I did think there was going to be a harsh reception for Novak Djokovic, who I think public sentiment was very against Djokovic the year before when he was deported and for not being vaccinated. And yet, aside from the odd heckle, I think the fans really embraced him in Australia. And so I can see that happening. I could see heckling from the odd intoxicated fan in the stands, whether it's especially on the outer courts, perhaps. But I don't know. I think for a tournament that really prides itself on politeness and gentility, I don't know if they will really be sort of that kind of soccer match antics. It would surprise me. I mean, it's possible that it'll happen, perhaps even, but it's just, given the kinds of players and rather the kinds of people who show up to center court, I don't think it's going to be a total madhouse, but possible I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. I just think England is a country that is very aware of everything, and they do everything for a reason. Mm-hmm. And from the Battle of the Brits during COVID to not letting Russians play to following protocol very well during COVID, it seems that the LTA is very tapped into everything else in the world. So when it comes to these players, and especially with this quote unquote contract that players have to sign, I feel like it's a more, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for this, but it's the reality of the situation. It's more of a liability agreement saying that Wimbledon is not involved with what these players may or may not represent.
Yeah, I mean, they've obviously taken a different stance to the rest of the tennis world, the rest of to the ATP and the WTA tours, who responded the way they responded to Russians and Belarusians being banned from Wimbledon. I think ultimately it's sort of it's not quite, but it reminds me a little bit of the vaccine issue, where the players ultimately, most of them just did what they needed to do to play. And so I would imagine the rest will do that. But I don't know. We can't look into everybody's hearts. I mean, I've certainly seen a lot of attempts from even, the Ukrainian press to really drill down on which Russians or Belarusians may or may not be harboring, or even indirectly supporting the Russians and Belarusian military. And I often find that to be a bit wishy-washy. I don't find any like secret support. I mean, if it's happening, they're doing a better job of hiding it. So I listen, it's a very complicated issue. And so I hope everyone's able to play. I hope everything goes well. And I certainly hope that there's not, a booing, heckling, jeering. I mean, again, it feels as much as they're plugged in, it also feels very beneath the British crowd to behave that way. So I would hope not.
Yeah. And I agree. And to kind of get back into the tennis aspect of this episode, what are your thoughts on, who am I thinking of? Mira Andreeva.
Oh boy. Talk about a litmus test match going up against Coco Gauff in the third round. That felt like a really interesting sliding doors one for Andreeva, where you felt like if she wins that match, we're off to the races. And this is someone who now can, compete with the top 10 player, beat her. And given the kind of game that Coco Gauff possesses, not overly powerful, you think that perhaps this is an entree for Andreeva to
good one,
really continue to fast track her ascent up the rankings. And the fact that Gauff was able to eventually figure her out, overpower Andreeva, who for as good as her technique is still not just built up, strong, powerful. I think it's possible she becomes that. Yeah, but it's she's not there yet. And I think Gauff exposed that, maybe emotionally wasn't fully ready to handle the occasion, got very upset towards the end of that match. And so I had been impressed with her to that point, but I think given the way that match ended, the fact that she lost and the way that it ended against Gauff, I think you pump the brakes a little bit. You say, okay, this is still a very young girl who has time and room to grow. But from a technical standpoint, I was pretty impressed with the way that she hits the ball, the way that she strikes the ball, the way that she serves and competes in general. I thought that there's a lot of upside to her. And so I'm looking forward to seeing her to continue to improve, get stronger. But I don't also think that this is someone who's going to be necessarily, top 20 by the end of the year. Give her another 18 months at least, if not more.
No, I agree, because the more you talk about her in that way, it reminds me of the start of how Coco Gauff's journey began, and very similar in that way, not just as a teenager, but as one that we're going to watch and play a lot more. And it seems like she has that potential to go along that same path as Coco Gauff. I think the difference with Gauff now is that I think when we first saw Coco play, I don't think there was the same fixation on the technique. I think we were so impressed by Coco's athleticism, by how intelligent she is, by how well she competes, her tenacity, the mentality is really unmatched, and so with sort of what we've learned about Gauff, and maybe the fact that, we put all that, we prioritize that at the expense of, hey, the forehand's not great. I think we are looking at Andreeva with a bit more of a critical eye, which is important, because now if there were issues with the technique, we'd be saying, all right, this is potentially, a non-starter for her. But I think that the good news for Andreeva is that there doesn't appear to be any major technical hitches in the game. And that's the best news. Granted, she's still in an age where she could fix these things, but still, you want to be, by the time you're on court Suzanne Lenglan, you don't want to be having any kind of like major technical issues at that age, because those are only going to get exacerbated, as we've seen with Gauff, as more players get to know her game and get to know how to beat her. Things have gotten exposed. And so in the meantime, it's still just stuff that Andreeva can improve, which is just strength and power. I agree. And two players that I actually, one that's going to be a better storyline. And we can start with that. Sue Shea won her first Grand Slam back as a doubles player.
She's great, isn't she?
I made a video
Answer is
about
yes,
her.
Phil.
Well, yes, it is a yes, but I'm going to preface what I'm about to say with a video that I made. I made a video about Sue Shea when I first started my channel, describing her as, and I'll admit to this, describing her as a country club type player that always wins and you don't know how, but she does. But on the pro circuit, you just love to see it because it's just that abnormal and interesting to be a witness to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's,
I mean,
that's all I got.
I think she's fabulous. I mean, I think she's someone who's got such tremendous hand-eye coordination, who is an example of someone who hits with vibes, but there is intent behind the shot. And I think that's sort of the difference. Where if you're not relying on traditional patterns, you have to have this phenomenal hand-eye coordination. You have to have everything else to make up for the lack of sort of traditional gameplay, especially in what has become such a homogenized tour and circuit structure. So I am glad that we have not seen the last of Sue. I think she's just such a value add. Talk about Breakpoint. Would love to see her get her own episode. I think she would really carry. So the fact that even just the story of how she came back, just like I'm coming back, and here she is, and she's winning and can play with pretty much any partner. So it's one of the feel good stories so far of the season, and I hope that we haven't seen the last of her.
And the other player that I wanted to mention was Miyu Kato, who is a player that basically had the worst downfall and then the best redemption story at Roland Garros. It's, for those of you that haven't followed the storyline, Kato, was disqualified by accidentally hitting a ball girl during her doubles match. And that meant that she had to give up ranking points and prize money. And David, you can jump in to correct me at any point if I get this wrong. But she then goes on to play mixed doubles with Tim Poots, and they win. They win the entire mixed doubles draw at Roland Garros after beating Andreescu and Michael Venus. So how would you describe this? I feel like everyone was on her side after the incident.
They were. I don't know if they would have been if this had happened to Nick Kyrgios or someone who was not Miyu Kato. I think, we talk about, perfect victimhood. I think she was really a perfect, this couldn't have been a more unlucky situation. The circumstances around her default, I think, have gotten a bit muddled a little bit because it didn't seem like, when we have these situations, we rely on precedent often. And because it didn't look like what happened with Novak Djokovic, and because it didn't look like, Nick Kyrgios flinging a chair in Rome, we feel like this was beyond the pale. And, Marie Bouzkova and Saras Rubas-Tormo got a lot of flack for appearing to instigate the default. I don't know if you're on the court and you see a girl crying that you don't notify the umpire. I don't really know what the alternative was to the situation. Are you just supposed to not acknowledge that? And then obviously, according to Bouzkova, who I spoke to right after the match, there was a bit of interest right away because it was immediately a controversial story with a lot of takes going back and forth. Bouzkova claims that she heard the ball, that she didn't see it, but she heard the ball. And she explains that in such a way to indicate that she heard it hit the ball
kit. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm on the court and I hear the ball hit somebody, I see the girl crying, what am I to think? If not that, and I think it's ultimately a lesson in responsibility, and that you have to be careful, that you cannot, Miyu Kato was not looking when she hit that ball. And if she was, I don't think she would have hit anybody, and so it was certainly something, she didn't mean to hit the ball girl. Novak Djokovic didn't mean to hit that lineswoman. And yet when you hit the ball irresponsibly, you're no longer in control of your destiny. And so the fact that she was able to turn around and ride the goodwill to a mixed title, I think is fantastic, because I think a lot of the sympathy was centered around the fact that as a doubles specialist, the fact that she lost her doubles prize money was a bit more of a hit than, even for a Djokovic, who certainly wasn't hurting for prize money after what happened to him, or, the various and sundry issues that Kyrgios has had on court. But I did feel bad for Bouzkova and Sorribes Tormo, who got a lot of targeted harassment as a result of what happened. And I didn't love that the PTPA got involved and sort of threw them under the bus as well, and sort of implicitly blamed them for the default, and said that defaults should not happen with influence from outside sources. And who are we to infer these outside sources are, if not Bouzkova and Sorribes Tormo? And so I thought that was a bit, for a organization that rarely takes a firm stance one way or another, I thought that was weird that an organization that purports to protect players is taking their hard stance, at the expense of players who are being, harassed, on social media. And obviously, Kato's been, there's a lot of people's new favorite player. But yeah, I think all's well that ends well. Ultimately, Kato, took that momentum and won her mixed title. I think that's great. And I think, I highly doubt she will make that mistake again. I think it's just a lesson for all players to keep your eye on the ball, and, maybe don't even hit the ball across the court, just drop it on the ground and let the ball kids take care of the rest. I think we need to just really be really careful, because I think this could have been a lot worse. She could have been a lot more injured, the ball girl. But we've started to see over the last year, whether it was Stefanos Tsitsipas, players being quite, even what Mira Andreeva did, it's being reckless will ultimately yield these sorts of situations. And so I think if we can all learn to be a little less reckless on the court, the less likely that we will have instances like this.
Well, I think the references to Novak and Kyrgios is about, I think the word is intent. Their intent, like Novak did it in a violent way. He did it out of frustration. Kyrgios, I think even during their doubles run, Kyrgios hit a overhead. It bounced hard and hit someone in the stands. Miyu was practicing a forehand. Yes.
I don't think she was. It was like this. It was not. She
was
practicing a forehand.
Or was she?
Yeah, she was. She was like her whole body was to the side of the net, and she was hitting like a backhand. It was not a practice swing by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, when she hit it,
it certainly was not in anger. If that's what your point is, it certainly was not hit in anger.
It wasn't, because she sliced it, and the photo that I'm looking at, she's looking in the direction of which she hit the ball. And for me, that's different than hitting it out of frustration with enough force to injure someone. And I think what didn't help was the photo of Bouzkova and Sorribes Tormo smiling on the bench.
Yeah, I didn't like the way that was disseminated either. It's the same situation with Aryna Sabalenka seeming to smile at her camp, and people then inferring that to mean that she, stood at the net on purpose. I think Sorribes Tormo and Bouzkova, first of all, they're friends. They could have been talking and laughing about anything. They could have been laughing about the bizarreness of the situation. From their vantage point, they both said, they heard the ball, they heard the girl cry. And what are you to do in that situation? If you're seeing a ball girl cry on the court, I don't know what the alternative is to ignore her.
Exactly.
I've compared the situation, maybe Naomi Brody and Yelena Ostapenko a few years ago in Auckland. I'm pretty sure Naomi was really advocating for Ostapenko's default. And I think more what Sorribes Torma and Bouzkova were saying was, you need to look into, like, you need to check this out. She's crying. I don't know. I'm sure there are people who can clarify this, but I don't recall them saying that's a default or she should be defaulted. It was, you should check this out because she's, I know they did say there's blood, which I don't know. I don't quite know where that came from, but either way, I find that to be a moot point because the umpire and the supervisor would check that accusation. Like, that's not, doesn't matter to me whether they said there was blood or not.
So let me ask you this. Did she deserve to have everything stripped after the appeal?
I don't know. I mean, it's for me, it doesn't really matter because she won the mixed title. Like, I feel bad for the partner, who literally.
Well, she doesn't get anything taken from her.
That's right. Yeah, I don't think
the partner doesn't. She doesn't get. She doesn't lose the prize money, and she doesn't lose the points.
Right.
It just makes it seem like she lost the round.
Right. I mean, and also they were losing. It bears reminding that they were down a set when that happened. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, from my vantage point, it appeared to me that she was not looking where she was hitting the ball.
Okay.
There are other questions. Should the ball kids be that young? Maybe there are other, things that need to be addressed. But I think when you hit the ball and you're not paying perfectly close attention to where you're hitting it, I think you take the rules into your own hands. And I do not think that Bouzkova and Sorribes Torma instigated the default. I think ultimately,
I think that's the moral of the story, is that you can't blame them for pointing something out, especially when it's affecting your match, because you're just trying to make sure everyone's okay. Do you have blisters on your hand? Why are you blowing on your hand?
I'm gripping this.
Stop gripping it so hard. It's like, you don't have blisters from holding a microphone.
I'm getting bullied on camera, ladies and gentlemen. My hands get warm. It's
trying to be Rafael Nadal out here, going like, while he's holding a tennis racket. This makes no sense to me.
He's bullying me.
This is not bullying. This is assault.
We're not finishing this video until I accuse Phil Palm of being on camera.
No, stop.
I'm kidding.
This can't end well.
Laugh. Funny.
Okay, what else happened during this tournament?
I missed you, Phil.
Oh, God. Shit. All right. We got to end on something other than that. Pavlyuchenkova making the quarterfinals with a protected ranking. Go.
I loved it. I thought it was great. Little bummed that she beat my semifinal pick, Anastasia Potapova, in the third round, but watching her on
she's your girl though, isn't she?
Against
Potapova's your girl.
She was my pick. She was my pick to make this. I mean, it was also a testament to the strangeness of the draw, was that when the draw came out, I think everybody looked at that third quarter, that Sakkari section, and felt like, okay, this is where you're going to get your surprise semifinalist. I thought it'd be Potapova. It ended up being Muchova, and Muchova made it all the way to the final and very nearly won the title. And so I think when your nearly Grand Slam champion comes out of the universally acclaimed weird quarter, it's a strange tournament. But seeing Pavlyuchenkova against Elisa Mertens on Chatrier, seeing the depth and weight of shot, it made sense why she beat Potapova. And it was fascinating to hear her talk about Impress, the fact that she lost to Swiatek 6-0, 6-0 in Rome, and how it really inspired her to just revamp everything. And she comes to Paris looking in phenomenal shape, hitting the ball really well, really great. Fighting spirit, I think, ran out of gas a little bit in the quarters. I don't think you can blame her, given just the physicality that she had to put out there over those several matches. Beat Samsonova, beat Potapova, beat Mertens, and was very close. Had her chances against Muchova in the last 8. But I think she's very much in this. In the next couple of months, hard courts. I would love to see her really be all that she should have been in her career. She's somewhat like one of those pure ball strikers, and it's great to see her back in the mix. Great to see her motivated. I mentioned it to her in press. This is someone who's really not taken any time off, really, since she turned pro at a very young age in like 2007. So I think the fact that she had that time off to refresh, reset, comes back and plays some really great tennis. I think that's something to be very pleased with. And I hope that she's able to replicate this again before the end of the season.
I totally agree. And last but not least, before we let David go, as of today, Annette Kontaveit has announced her retirement. That was weird. That was very unexpected. She's 27.
That sounds right. Yeah. I mean, I was.
But she's been on tour for 13 years. Is that what everyone's been saying? Like, is that right?
Maybe not on. I mean, I was at her junior US Open final in 2012 when she lost to Sam Crawford. So I think
she's 27.
Really yeah. I mean, very young still.
We're the same age. How is that possible?
You ready to pick a new career, Phil? Is it time for you to make a pivot?
I wish I did. I wish I made $10 million.
With Annette Kontaveit, you're gonna pack up, move to Tallinn.
Yeah, I'm gonna move to Estonia.
You're gonna start a Game of Thrones podcast with Annette Kontaveit.
Have you seen? Is that where your reference is for?
No, she's a huge, she's like a notoriously huge Game of Thrones fan. Like she used to wear like the Khaleesi wig.
No, I asked her that when I interviewed her in 2019 in Stuttgart, and I asked her about that. I thought you were making a joke to my video.
No, I was making a joke about because I was making a joke a little bit about Kontaveit, not to speak for the dead, but you were in Stuttgart
in 2019.
Oh, good for you.
Thank you.
Classic pre-pandemic optimism. Yeah, so I was at her match against Bernarda Pera and was not hopeful that she was going to necessarily turn things around quickly. She seemed out of sorts, didn't seem necessarily out of shape, but was not connecting with the ball the way that she was at the end of 2021.
I just don't think she found her game. And again, you have to take this with a grain of salt. And I feel like everyone that's listening / watching this has to as well. But all throughout social media, it seemed like she was just enjoying life. And from the injury that she talked about with having something gone wrong in her back, it seems like she wouldn't be able to play without pain. And
correct. It seemed like a degenerative condition.
Yeah, it was in her lumbar. And
lumbar spine.
Yes. But for being a world number 2 and probably having a really good game compared to some of the other people on tour, I enjoyed watching her play. So I was surprised to see and shocked, honestly, that she is now we'll use the word the Serena Williams transitioning
Evolved.
over to yes, if you want to put it that way. Yes.
She did evolved away from tennis.
Exactly.
I mean, God, it just feels like whiplash with Kontaveit. I mean, like just 2 years ago, when she was playing that level of hyper aggression under Dmitry Tursunov and winning all those matches in a row to make the WTA finals, she was really fun to watch. And she's always been someone I enjoyed watching, but someone I talk about with a grain of salt. For most of her career, she was someone who lacked that intangible to get her over the finish line, to get
over the hump.
Signature win, breakthrough result was really missing. I go back to that 2017 Wimbledon against Caroline Wozniacki, where talk about Andreeva versus Goff. I mean, that was like a total alley-oop for Kontaveit to get the big win and, go deep, make the second week of Wimbledon. Doesn't do it, and really was at loose ends for several years after that match, then finally gets things together under Tursunov, employs this hyper aggressive game style that, I mean, probably was not super sustainable physically. I mean, I think we really saw her body break down shortly thereafter. And it's sort of the story of potential unfulfilled, because she was someone who was such a clean hitter of the ball.
Yeah.
You kind of want to see that tennis rewarded, superficially or perhaps selfishly. And it's a surprise in that I feel like a lot of people have kind of taken their eye off Kontaveit over the last 6 months. I mean, she was number 2, effectively a name only for a lot of that tenure between, the spring and the US Open. I mean, it just felt like she was,
Yeah.
had COVID, was injured, was sort of just not a factor. And so it was sort of like really once she lost that, Australian
Momentum.
Open match to Clara Towson, it just felt like, the alarms had kind of dialed back in terms of what can Kontaveit do on tour. And so it's a shame. The good news, I suppose, is that she's still very young. And I think this sort of smacks of perhaps a short-term retirement. This is perhaps, in a year or two, she's feeling better. She comes back and, and achieves a modicum of success to a lot of success. I mean, I think the fact that she is that young gives you hope that perhaps this isn't over. I mean, she's a really good communicator. I would love to see what she does within
well-spoken.
tennis.
Be a pundit.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of upside to Annette, off the court as well. So I was heartened to see sort of the outpouring. It goes to show how beloved, she really was within the locker room from the tour. And that's always nice because in the wake of just a really sad announcement, to get that kind of love and support from your peers is got to make you feel good. So, I mean, all told, I will miss her. I was intrigued by her ascent and to see what she could do. And I hope that, she has a really nice future on the court or off.
Absolutely. And technically she's not done yet. She is playing after Wimbledon. After her Wimbledon, she will be then transitioning out of the sport. But at the same time, she still will be missed. And David, these conversations are always such a pleasure to have you on, to make me very uncomfortable all the fucking time and to possibly get me canceled at some points. So thank you, David, for joining me and finally doing this.
The goal is to turn Phil Farmer red, ladies and gentlemen. It's just to get that light blush across the cheek. When he gives me the dead eyes, I know that he loves me.
I'm going to throw up in my mouth. All right. Oh. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I really do appreciate this. Go follow David on Twitter. It's a lot of fun to watch him or read his tweets, especially now that Zendaya is now playing tennis and her forehand technique is, how would you describe it?
I would say, show me Zendaya's forehand and I will show you 20 gay men prepared to defend that technique to the hilt. It's wacky, but it's a little like Ostapenko adjacent. Like, doesn't it feel like something
not even close.
Like, it's beautiful. Like, it's.
Have you seen her left when Zendaya hits that with her as a tennis coach? I have to say she has T-Rex arms when she hits that forehand. Her left arm is here. And the biggest backswing in the entire world of.
She put her holes in the sands of that one.
That was technical wise. Zendaya, if you need a tennis coach, hi, how's it going? There are plenty of people that will help you with that. But
gotta get ready for the sequel.
Well, okay. Thank you guys so much for joining in. Go follow David on Twitter. Please do not roast me or him. Thank you again, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks, guys.
Bye.